What's going on, you guys? Welcome back. Ripped up pants, dirty sweatshirt, cars lifted up. You know what that means. We're working on the Nova. And what's on today's agenda? Well, we're going to change out the wheel bearings. Now, when I built the car, when I went to do the original dashboard, I zeroed out the entire dashboard. Basically, I took it apart and just zeroed it out. I did that so that as the car progressed, you know, as I drove the car, as the years went by after the build, I would know when to do some service maintenance on different parts of the car. And so since it was zeroed out, right around 10,000 miles, I decided to redo the braking system, and basically I changed out the rotors to some slotted and cross-drilled rotors. So that called for me to put new bearings, blah, blah, blah. So I did all that, and when I bought it as a set, came with the bearings, all was good. Now, obviously, I've driven the car many years. I've put a lot of miles on it. Now I use the car for like road trips, long road trips, and that's basically what the car is, just a cruiser. And I have daily driven this car. I mean, I've put lots of miles every single day. When my other car broke down and I had to junk it, this became my daily driver. It's my true daily driver. And so this car definitely got some use. Well, now here we are, and I decided, you know what, it's been a while. Let me go ahead and change out the wheel bearings. And so you can see the car's already lifted, and that's what's on today's agenda. We're going to go ahead and change out those bearings, and I'm taking you guys along. So let's get to work. So I got the wheel all lifted up, and before taking the wheel off, let me just show you. There's my new cross-drilled and slotted rotors. As I stated, I changed it out. I also did some Willwood dual piston calipers, and I also did some other stuff when I upgraded the braking system back at around 10,000 miles. So once you got the wheel up, it's a good idea to check to see how much play your wheel actually has. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab the wheel, and you know, basically you just grab the top and the bottom, and you kind of rock the wheel. And I can see I got not a lot, but just a little bit of play. So if you got a lot more play in that, or when you rotate the wheel, you start hearing some grinding noises. And in my case, I don't hear any grinding noises. So, you know, I'm good there. But if you hear some grinding noises, that's a definite sign that you need to change out the wheel bearings. So let's go ahead and check out how many miles I actually have on the Nova. So let's see if it could pick it up. So, oh, it's not picking. Let me turn on the headlights. There you go. You can kind of see 45,357. So we got a lot of miles on this Nova. So yeah, it's about that time to change out the wheel bearings. Now let's go and check out the manual, because I went ahead and checked out the manual of this Nova. And let's see what the manual says, the recommended interval for changing out the bearings or repacking them or whatever. Let's look at the manual and let's check out the wheel bearings. So we're here in the front wheel bearings, and you can see there is every 24,000 miles. Well, you saw the mileage on my Nova, and it's definitely way past 24,000 miles. That number right there is what's important to me, and I have 45,000 miles. And if I changed my bearings out at 10,000 miles and it's now 40,000 miles, well, we're definitely over that by a lot of miles. So it's definitely time to do the bearings. So here we are, the wheel's taken off, and we got ourselves a rotor and a caliper. Basically, just gonna explain it real quick. take off this. After you take this off, you're gonna see a cotter pin, the castle nut, and the washer. You pull that off, and the nut shouldn't be on there tight. Should be, you know, just kind of hand tight. Maybe just a, you know, a little tight, but you shouldn't have to, you know, crank on it to get the castle nut off. It should be there fairly, you know, snug. That's the word. Take the caliper off, and after you get the nut off, you just take off the whole assembly. So we're gonna go ahead and do that right now. I'll put the camera down, and just for entertainment purposes, we'll go ahead and take care of that, and we'll kind of speed up through the process. So looks all right, you know, and there's still some pink grease there, so that's pretty good, you know. It's not that dirty. Take out the rotor, and here. So we see here we got the other bearing there, and looks like the get a better light. Looks like the grease looks good, but looks like the seal came off pretty easily. So let's fish that stuff out of there, and we're gonna clean up the spindle and check out the spindle. It's important that you inspect the surfaces that the bearing is gonna be riding for any score marks or anything like that. So it looks pretty good. Yeah, it looks pretty good. There's no scoring on there. It's still very smooth. You can see there, and then the other one, nice and smooth. Now, if you run your nail on here and you feel any scoring or any, you know, deep scoring and your fingernail catches, then, you know, it would be best to just change out the spindle. But in my case, it came out, you know, super smooth, silky smooth, and no scoring marks or anything. Just a, you know, typical, I guess, wear, but no scoring on there whatsoever. So I'm good there. I don't have to be changing any more parts. So we go on to getting those races out, because we can see here's the race right here. We got to get that sucker out. And of course the other race. So I'm going to clean up this rotor, and we'll get on to that step. Okay, so I cleaned it all up, and I got rid of all the grease. A lot of paper towels I needed to use to get that all nice and clean. But now we can see the races, and man, that race looks beautiful. There's no scoring on it. It's super silky smooth. It just looks beautiful. So all the miles that I put on there, though there is, you know, slight wear, it's pretty normal. And then we'll check out the other race that's on the back, which is the inner race, and same thing. Man, that looks beautiful. That's gorgeous. That makes me happy. So now we need to punch those suckers out so I can put the new ones in. And I'll show you the new ones here. Let me just grab them real quick. Okay, so we got the new ones here. I'm gonna use some National bearings, and here's the new ones. And we're gonna slap those suckers in there. You just give a comparison. There's the new finish of the race, and then of course there's the race for my over 30,000 miles on that race. So we need to punch those out. Now you can see on the bottom there's like a little lip of the race. You need to kind of, push it out. You take a screwdriver or punch, and you just kind of bang it, on all four corners until you get that sucker out. Then, of course, you flip this sucker around, and the same thing. You can see, get my finger there. You can see right here, there's a little bit of a lip, and same thing, all four corners. Of course, you have to do it at an angle, but you get the idea. You gotta punch that sucker out. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that with a screwdriver or punch, see what I have, and we'll get those races out. So let's see if we can get you a shot of how I'm doing this. So I found me this punch type chisel, and with a hammer, I'm gonna go ahead and knock out the inner race first, since it's a little bit harder because you have to do it at an angle. So I think you can kind of see what I'm doing there. Let's go ahead and just kind of knock it out. There you go. Came out. So let's do the other one real quick, the other side, and see if we can lay it on my blocks here, so that way we get the other one out. You can see that. So I'm gonna go ahead and punch out the other one real quick. Same procedure with the punch and going around the edge there. There you go. Pretty easy. It takes a couple seconds, about a minute or whatever, to take it out. But it is something that I would have to say is better to do than to just leave the races in there and just kind of slap the bearing in there. The races and the bearings, when they make them as a match set. And so if you slap a new bearing in there, let's say you get a Timken bearing, and what's in the rotor is like a National or just the off-brand or whatever brand in there, and if the tolerances are slightly different, when you smack that bearing in there, it won't be true, and you'll probably get a little bit more wear on a corner or something, and that wouldn't be good. So it's best to just change out the set. I mean, when you buy it, you never just get this, you get the whole set. So for the time it takes to punch those suckers out, put them back in, I think you should, go ahead and consider doing that. It's definitely worth it. Then you're getting a match set in there, and it'll last, a longer time than to have a mismatched set. A bearing and a race that are mismatched. Okay, so you got them all out. You got it all nice and clean. So you see there, I cleaned it up really good. You got it all nice and clean. you got your set of bearings. You took off the raced part of the set. You put it right here. And now, how do you smack that sucker in there? Well, a couple ways you can do that. One, you can take the old race. You can grind it down a little bit so that it just falls right in. You know, it's nice and loose. And you take the thick side, you put it up against the thin side of the, you know, of the new race. And then you just pound that sucker in there, or use a press or whatever, so that, you know, you can push that sucker in there. That's one way. So that's not the way I'm gonna do it. The second way is to get a socket that matches the, you know, the diameter of this, so you can place it on top of there and do the same thing. Obviously, that's a big socket, and for at least this one, and I don't have a socket that big, so that's not the way I'm gonna do it. Or you can go to the auto parts store, pick yourself one of these bearing race and seal driver set, and you rent it, and you do the job, and take it back, get your money back, and you just had the tool, and you was able to do it for free. And that's the way I'm doing it. So I picked out the two that I'm going to be using to match the two bearings that goes on there, the inner and the outer. And I could do it like this, which is the way you're supposed to do it. So let me show you. So it's supposed to be like this, but I didn't like that it didn't go all the way through. Plus, I don't want to kind of, you know, I mean, this is used, obviously, and this was used a lot. Now, if you bought a brand new set, go ahead and stick that sucker in there, and you don't got to worry about marring up the inside. But this is not a brand new set, obviously. This is a used set. So this one here, the outer diameter of this fits perfectly. You can see there? So perfectly on the outer diameter of the race. So what I plan on doing is, I plan on using the tool, but upside down, pounding that sucker in there until, now make sure that you pound it all the way till it bottoms out. Has to bottom out. So I'm gonna pound that sucker in there, and repeat on the other side, and we're done. Okay, so I got it all set up, and I got my race in there, and ready to be, you know, placed in there, pounded in. So I got the setup over here, as you can see. You can see that, yeah, you can see that. So I'm gonna go ahead and kind of square it up, make sure it's nice and straight, and I'm gonna pound it with a hammer and try to get it in there nice and straight and bottomed out. You just gotta keep on doing it, and as it goes down, you can hear me hammering away, but you're gonna listen, or you're gonna hear when the hammer tone changes, and that's when you know you bottomed out. So let's continue on there. You heard that? It changed. So we're bottomed out. Let's just get a couple whacks, make sure it's fully seated. There. Let's get you to look at that. In there really good. Beautiful. Now you got the race in there, and you basically repeat it for the other side. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn it around. And you can see the lip there on the bottom. So I got it seated right up against the stop there. So now I'm gonna go ahead and do it again. Repeat the procedure for the other bearing. You saw how easy it was to smack that sucker in there with just a, you know, small hammer, and of course the bearing and race tool set, race and bearing set. So it's worth it. So there, got my new races in. Now all I gotta do is just grease that sucker up, grease this sucker up, and of course after I grease it up, you know, grease up the inside, because what I like to do is I actually like to fill this cavity with grease. This is the grease. It's Mystic number 2 JT6. This is the grease that I used originally when I put this sucker together. And so, yeah, I you know, I don't like to mix grease, even though I did a really great job at cleaning it. But I want to go ahead and put the same grease in there and, you know, get the job done. Okay, so what's the next step? Well, we got to fill these suckers with grease. We got to pack them really good. And now there's a way to do this. Actually 2 ways. And I'm going to use the other way, but I'm going to kind of briefly explain the original way, like back in the day way. Okay, so set this up. Let's set this camera up somewhat. Okay, basically what you do is you take a blob of grease, put it in the middle of your hand, and then you take the bearing, and you see this open channel right here. You just basically grab the bearing and kind of force the grease through by doing this sweeping motion. Basically pushing the grease through that groove, and you keep doing it until the grease starts coming out of here. And then you go turn it a little bit, do it again until it comes out, turn it a little bit till it comes out, and keep doing that all the way around until you got grease coming out of every single one of these channels. Then you take some of that grease that you have in your hand and smear all over it. Make sure that all these channels are completely covered with grease, including anything you can get in between the rollers. That's the old-fashioned way. That's the way that you know, my pops showed me, and I'm sure many other pops have shown their sons when working on these old cars. And that works very, very well. It's very messy. You get grease all over your hands, and well, you know, there's a tool that works that accomplishes the same thing, and that's the bearing packer tool. Now here's the Mystic JT6. Basically what I do is I take a razor blade, just a razor blade, and slice that tube in half, and then grab that grease and stuff it in there. Now this is just a cap. It's just a dust cap, okay? But this is the tool right here. And so you can see all the grease in there. So I basically fill it up. Now let me take this off. This screws off, but when you're using this tool, you don't have to worry about screwing it down. You're just basically, you know, kind of pushing it down. I'm gonna try to show you this live. So you can see on the bottom there's a bunch of holes. So the way this works is you take the bearing and you smack it on there, you know? And the idea is that when it's like that and you're forcing down this thing over the bearing, well, the grease is supposed to come through there. So we're gonna try to do that live, and that way you can see it in action. And let's start with the small bearing, the outer bearing first. Put that in there, and it doesn't have to be perfectly, you know, squared. It'll square up once you put this cone on. And let's see if I can show you this. So we pretty much, let's see, let's put the camera there. And then you take your palm and you put it on top, and you just kind of rock it while putting downward pressure, and you can see the grease coming through. Take the thing off. See, grease went through the whole sucker. I mean, the whole thing is now greased. So I like to, you know, kind of get a little more through there. So, and you know, you just put some downward pressure, and you can see right here, you see some grease coming out through there. So you know that's properly packed. And you just basically do that for both of them, and you're pretty much done. Your bearing is properly packed with grease. So this one's pretty much ready. All I gotta do is just lift it and smear the grease all over it. Make sure it's all over the place, and this one is done. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the other one. Then I'm gonna smear some grease on the race here after I do the big one there. Smear some grease on there, and then I'm gonna go ahead and take the seal. I'll show you the seal, and the open end of the seal. See, there's a flat end, and then there's an open end. The open end goes down, so when you're looking at it, the flat end is on the outside. And basically, what you do is you just kind of, you know, press that sucker in there until it's nice and flat or flush with the outside, and you're pretty much done. Then of course you install it. So once I get all that done, you know, fill this cavity, put grease on here, put this on there, we'll cut the camera back on, and then we get to put grease on that. We just smear some grease on here and on here, and then you pretty much install the rotor. Okay, so I'm pretty much ready. I filled up that cavity with some grease. I put on my seal, and what I like to do, it's probably overkill, but it just makes me feel better. The space between the seal and the actual tapered roller bearing, I actually fill that void with grease. So you can see all the way around, we got lots of grease in there. And then of course, I just clean this up with some acetone, get it all nice and pretty. And then we got that greased up, ready to go. So this is right here, a bearing surface, and right up here is the seal surface. So all those areas got greased up real nice. And so then I'm pretty much ready to put this sucker back in. So let's see if we can prep the, you know, this camera to show you the process. So got this grease. Let's see if we can put this in there nice and easy. Just nice and easy. So, there. There it is, nice and easy. Okay, it's in there. Now, we take the other bearing, which is nicely greased, and we stick that sucker in there. There. Give it a little twist, a little roll. There. There it is. Nicely greased. So we got that in there. Yeah, you guys can see that. So basically, you're done. At this point, you're pretty much done. You've pretty much greased it up. You put the bearings on, and then all we got to do is just put, you know, the nut, which I'm gonna have to clean, the cap, that washer, and of course, when I was removing the cotter pin, I broke it. So I knew that might happen, so I got me a new cotter pin to replace the old one. So this job is pretty much done. So now comes the part where some may ask, how tight should we put this nut? Well, what I like to do is I like to pretty much, you know, kind of put it on there. Let me clean this off. And after I got it on there, finger tight, I rotate the rotor. You see it rotates nice and freely. And then I take a torque wrench. In this case, I'm using an inch-pound torque wrench. And I tighten that sucker to somewhere around 10 foot-pounds while I'm rotating the rotor. That way, I ensure that the bearings are seated properly. And, you know, we don't have any issues with, you know, that portion of it. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now so you guys can see. and then I'll show you what I do after that, because you know, we don't leave it at, we don't do that to 10 foot-pounds and leave it at 10 foot-pounds. That'll be a little bit too tight. So let's just do that right now. So I got it set up. I'm going to tighten that nut. I'm going to be rotating until there. That's 10 foot-pounds or 120 inch-pounds. It's not a lot, but it's seated, and you can see it still rotates probably 1.5 turns, but at least I know that the bearings are fully seated. So then what I do is I loosen it just a little bit, about a 1/4 turn, so that I'm now able to move it by hand. And then I just pretty much tighten it up by hand until I get to my cotter pin hole, which you can see there. And then of course I take my new cotter pin, which is right here, and we stick it in the hole. And that's pretty much done. And you see, remember I remember how I twisted it, it went 1.5. Now with that 1/4 turn backed out, and then just bring it back to the first slot that I can by hand, we now spin it, and you can see how free it is. Now why did I do that? Well, when this thing spins really fast, obviously everything is gonna heat up. We got the brakes pressing up against the rotor, heating up the rotor, everything gets hot. And as you know, when metal gets hot, it expands. So we don't want this, you know, tight, because when it starts expanding, those bearings are gonna tighten up even more, and they're gonna wear out prematurely. So we want it to be loose, but obviously not so loose that it falls out. Basically, we're only taking out all of the play. That's all we're doing when we tighten it up to 10 foot-pounds or 120 inch-pounds of torque on that nut. We're taking out all the slop, all the play. Then when we loosen it up, we're releasing the tension, and we're putting it back to where we can insert the cotter pin, and we call it done there. It's not too tight. We got rid of all the slop, and we don't have to worry about when that bearing heats up and starts expanding, it's going to get too tight and start wearing out prematurely. So this is basically what I do, and you know, we've compensated for the expansion, and we got a nice, smooth, well-seated bearing setup. There you have it. Took care of the wheel bearings, and it's not too long, you know, punching those races out and putting the new ones in, and just, you know, kind of getting that security that you have everything brand new, races and the bearings, and you're not going to have any problems. So that's pretty much the setup as far as, you know, changing out the roller taper bearings on these old vehicles. So now when I was explaining, you know, in the beginning of the video, I said that I kind of upgraded the braking system. And so I only showed you the rotors and of course the Wheelwood 2-piston brake setup. I also did all steel braided line, and I did one other thing, which you will see in the next video. So stay tuned for that next update so that you can see what else I did to the braking system to give it that much more performance oriented, stop on a dime feel to it, because the original setup just wasn't cutting it for me. And I realized that within the first 10,000 miles of using this car with the 454, heavy car. And you know, if I had to slam on the brakes, it took just a little bit to stop the car. And I wasn't happy with that. I wanted it to stop on a dime. So next episode, you're gonna see what I did in addition to the Wheelwood brakes, the rotors, and those brake lines which were steel braided. So, if you have not done already, hit that subscribe button and don't forget that notification bell so that you get notified when I make a video and I upload it. And of course, hit that like button. Just click and we're golden. That lets me know that I'm doing a good job showing you what I did to my Nova. It helps out the channel. It's for the YouTube algorithm. So until the next video, thank you very much for watching.